Imagine sitting in an engineering class where, before you learn a single law of physics, the professor asks you to evaluate tensile strength based on your personal worldview. You are asked to vote on gravity. Modern civic education operates on this exact pedagogical error. It demands that students critique the American constitutional order before they have achieved basic literacy in how the system is actually constructed. Rather than teaching that specific first principles form the immutable foundation of the system they live under, the curriculum asks students if those principles align with their private values. It treats the structural architecture of the Republic as one option among many worldviews. This habit relocates authority from the subject matter to the learner. The implicit lesson is that the constitutional order is only as legitimate as the student's personal agreement with it. When students are encouraged to judge an order they have never first learned, the pedagogical focus shifts from understanding to negation. Over time, this systematic habituation teaches both teachers and students to view the Republic's foundations as inherently suspect or illegitimate. The American constitutional republic functions as a deliberately engineered structural architecture. Like any physical structure, it rests on load-bearing realities, specifically a highly defined anthropology, or view of the human person, and a corresponding jurisprudence. Swapping out one of these foundational structural members alters the operational capacity of the entire political machine. This document serves as the operational blueprint derived from those realities. The text of the Constitution outlines the mechanics required to maintain the structure. Civic education must present these foundations exactly as one teaches the structure of the human skeleton, as logically descriptive operational realities. One does not ask if a student prefers a different anatomy. One teaches the architecture that currently sustains the body. The primary task of civic stewardship is establishing pure constitutional literacy, explaining the what and the why of the Republic's mechanics. The system is built upon a bedrock layer of specific anthropology and jurisprudence. From this base, 5 distinct load-bearing pillars rise to support the structure. Literacy begins with explaining why the system requires a creator, regardless of private belief, and why rights are defined as inalienable rather than granted by a government. Next are the mechanics of authority, why the government is strictly limited rather than sovereign, and why the people possess an original authority that the state does not. The final pillar establishes that equality before the law depends on a common, created human nature, rather than membership in a tribe or class. These 5 pillars support the roof of Republican self-government. These mechanics find their original articulation here, in the Declaration, which defines men as endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Understanding the operational necessity of these 5 pillars is the prerequisite for studying any alternative political philosophy. These foundational principles are rooted in Christian thought. Acknowledging this historical and ontological fact is often mischaracterized as religious imposition, but the two acts are distinct. Confessional formation deals with personal faith, worship, and the saving of souls, responsibilities the constitutional order leaves exclusively to families and churches.
The state's task is civic formation. It requires citizens to understand the anthropology and jurisprudence upon which their political order rests, so they are capable of exercising and defending it. Arguing to bring Christianity back into schools often triggers confessional battles that facilitate similar claims from faiths whose first principles are incompatible with the Declaration. The founders approached religion as a civic necessity because they understood that certain truths about the human person were indispensable to Republican self-government. Their focus was the maintenance of civic infrastructure, not the role of the church. Identifying the root foundations of the operating structure is an act of constitutional ontology. It describes the necessary conditions for maintaining this specific order without imposing a private confession. With the foundational architecture understood, students can finally analyze competing historical anthropologies through a structural lens. The analytical question is, can this alternative theory sustain the first principles of the American order? If we test the system against the anthropology of Rousseau,
His theories on human nature and the general will create an immediate friction with the Republic's load-bearing pillars of individual, inalienable rights. Marxist jurisprudence, which defines rights based on class membership and state power, is structurally incompatible with a system that views rights as pre-political and inherent to the individual. Swapping a foundation for an incompatible ideology leads to structural failure. When the underlying view of the human person changes, the constitutional architecture built upon the old view can no longer function in practice. For public servants sworn to the Constitution, identifying these structural contradictions is a matter of professional duty. If an ideology is operationally incompatible with the Republic's first principles, its implementation necessarily subverts and negates the constitutional order they are tasked to preserve. No education system is metaphysically neutral. Every curriculum transmits a specific account of what a human being is, what authority is for, and what law should accomplish. A modern subversion tactic involves redefining the transmission of America's constitutive knowledge as indoctrination. This creates a vacuum. By abandoning its own foundational principles, the system is immediately filled by a different anthropology and jurisprudence, smuggled in under the false label of neutrality. Once a republic ceases to reproduce its own foundational knowledge, education shifts from civic formation to civic reconstruction, the dismantling of the system from within. Reproducing civic knowledge is a legitimate interest of national security. It is the baseline requirement for a nation's continuation. This is a law of civilizational survival. A civilization that ceases to transmit the principles upon which it rests eventually ceases to exist as that civilization. We must stop treating the Republic's first principles as elective personal preferences. They are the immutable structural premises of our political system. True constitutional literacy is the faithful maintenance of civic infrastructure from one generation to the next. It is the stewardship required to ensure the architecture of the Republic stands for all time.